It is finally that time. We are moving on, moving up, and we will shift to Emily Dickinson. Let's start with just a little bit of basics around Emily Dickinson herself. So, as you can see, her dates place her solidly in the 19th century, in the kind of mid to late 19th century, 1830 to 1886. The way I want to characterize her is she's fiercely independent. She writes high-charged short poems that are erotic, thanatopic, investigative, hopeful, and joyous. She's a real intellectual when it comes to this. Thanatopic might be a word that you haven't seen before. All it means is she kind of looks at death. So literally it's death view. And what I want to focus on, so it's a topic that she writes about and that she is concerned with. But there's no reason to associate anything beyond that, right? We even looked at how in By the Bivouac's Fitful Flame, Walt Whitman also is thinking about life and death. So she's investigative. She thinks about the world around her and she looks at it and she tries to describe it in poetry. And as I mentioned, hopeful. And one of the poems that we'll actually look at today, we'll see the greatest articulation of that, and then joyous. One of the major innovations, though, for Emily Dickinson is she's really inventive and has this key metrical ear. So one of the ideas that we'll be looking at is her use of near rhyme or slant rhyme. So meter and form. Emily Dickinson primarily uses a quatrain structure with alternating line lengths. So the first line is longer than the second line. It's technically called a tetrameter and a trimeter, meaning 4 feet and 3 feet. We're not going to have that be a detail. But the key thing is that in those second and fourth lines, Dickinson frequently incorporates near rhyme or slant rhyme, and we'll look at that in a second. These 4 units, which are stanzas, are called quatrains. So if we think about rhyme the way you're used to thinking about it, right? Sleep would rhyme with weep. They have the same vowel and final consonant pronunciation. A near rhyme or a slant rhyme either sometimes looks the same or sounds very similar, but actually doesn't have that pure rhyme that you're used to hearing. So something like this, you would have sleep rhyming with dweeb, or snow with plow. So let's look at our first Dickinson poem. I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? Then there's a pair of us, don't tell. They'd advertise, you know. How dreary to be somebody. How public, like a frog, to tell one's name the livelong June to an admiring bog. So the basics, 2 stanzas. Each stanza is made up of 4 lines called a quatrain. We have 2 quatrains, 2 stanzaic quatrains. In the first one, the rhyme that we'll be interested in most is to and no. To and no. So they don't rhyme. They're not that pure rhyme that we're used to, but they do near rhyme or slant rhyme. Unlike in the second stanza with frog and bog being kind of perfect rhymes. You in the first stanza also rhymes with to in a really interesting way. Another characteristic of Emily Dickinson that you will notice are these highlights there, capitalizations with nobody, and then in the second stanza, somebody, right? Words that you aren't necessarily used to seeing capitalized, similar with frog and bog. So this is a visual, it draws attention to it. And lots and lots of dashes. Look at all of these dashes that are here on the page. And let's actually circle them, and we'll circle them in blue. So we've got dash, 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 and I missed one up there. And I missed one down there. Right, look at all these dashes. You can circle dashes for days. And the thing about these dashes is it sets Dickinson apart from the way we were looking at dashes in Whitman. So in Whitman, we were talking about how the dash is an interruption and a shift to a new thought. In Dickinson, dashes create almost a rush, an immediacy. It does separate things off a little bit, but there's a continuity. So it's the dash as continuity. So let's look at this poem a little bit. I'm nobody, the speaker declares, with an exclamation mark. Is there any sadness here? No, in fact, what we'll find is this poem celebrates being a nobody. And we see a direct curiosity with, like, who are you? And in a way, I'm nobody is the poet. It's the poet, or the speaker. Who then is the you? It's the reader. And so Dickinson introduces this relationship between the poet and reader as one of great intimacy. We don't need to know Emily Dickinson's name. It's just the words on the page, and the poet and the reader. That's the relationship. Are you nobody too? She asks. Then there's a pair of us, an exclamation, right? And this is where the relationship happens between poet and reader. It is with the act of reading. But don't tell. They'll advertise, you know. They'll advertise. What kind of word is advertise? Well, advertise is a word of showing. Showing. And look at all those exclamation marks, right? This is a high intensity poem. And then she shifts directions in the second stanza. How dreary, right? Think of dreary, those rainy days, to be somebody, right? This is not a good thing. To be famous, to be known is not a good thing. How public. And now we have a simile. How public, like a frog, to tell one's name, right? If you go around saying who you are all the time and trying to get to be known, that's doing it all June long, the live long June, to an admiring bog, And so that's saying the people that you're telling your name to, well, they're nothing but a bog. So they're like an anonymous public. An anonymous public, right? So we have these kind of concepts coming together. So a couple of things to note here in terms of figurative language. Frog and bog are pure rhymes. And we might even offer a simile or a thesis statement at this point. So in Nobody, Emily Dickinson uses the pure rhyme of frog and bog to suggest that chasing clout is an obnoxious and stinky business. With that admiring bog, we might also think about Walt Whitman's Learned Astronomer and the way that the people in the lecture hall were clapping, right? The applause of the lecture hall for the lecturer. And one final thing about this poem, looking at these words, advertise and admiring. So if you look at them, you'll see that in both lines that the respective words appear in, the word is the longest, right? Don't tell, they'd, you, know. All monosyllabic. Advertise. 3 syllables. Big. It takes up space, right? It's obnoxious. It kind of thrusts in, demanding space. 2, and, bog. Monosyllabic. The longest one is only 3 letters. And then in the middle of that, admiring. Although we might just pronounce it with 2 syllables, admiring, or 3. Otherwise, no, it depends on what you do. But we're even asked to look at these words more closely because what's Emily done? Well, she has repeated the same prefix. Repeated the same prefix. All right. Odd, meaning to or towards. And admiring has to do with looking. So we see how advertise says, hey, look at this thing, right? It shows it, and then admiring enacts it. So here's like a very short poem that's already doing so much with the literary terms that we've been looking through when we're focused on these ideas of diction, simile, and rhyme even. There's also, just as a quick review, a tiny bit here of anaphora, the repetition of a word or phrase at the beginning of successive lines. Let's look now at another poem of Dickinson's. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. There's a lot of really interesting things that happen in this poem. But I want to begin with something that we haven't seen directly before, and that's the use of metaphor, right? Hope is the thing with feathers. We've seen plenty of similes using a comparison of like or as, and now we have a metaphor where hope is the thing with feathers. And I hope this thing, it also perches in the soul, and it sings a tune without the words. So what is the metaphor? Well, the hope is a bird. Hope is a bird. Let's draw a little bird here. There's a nice bird. We'll give a bird an eyeball. Very friendly bird. So how do we know this? Well, we look at diction. We look at the diction in order to see it, right? Because we have feathers, perch, and sing. Perch is one of the words that really gets us there. And think about perch as a word, right? If you perch, how does a bird stand? It doesn't just put its feet flat on something. It claws, it digs into it, it holds tight. So it takes a firm position on your soul. So that's the location of hope. And it never stops at all, right? So you can't stop hope. This is one of the ideas when I say like she's very hopeful. Next stanza. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. So the first line introduces almost a philosophical concept. A gale is a huge windy storm. So why in a gale is it sweeter to hear than not? And by the way, what we're hearing is hope. We're hearing hope and the tune, all right? So in a gale, in a storm, the storm is the sweetest thing to hear. Why is it sweeter to hear a gale, or sorry, to hear a hope in a storm? Well, then when you're with your friends eating at McDonald's, because when you're at your friends eating at McDonald's, you're kind of at a neutral, happy place, right? You don't expect there to be any disaster. But if you're in a storm, think about a ship, you might be thinking, oh, I could drown, or the ship could sink, or lightning could strike. And so if you have hope at that point, it's even sweeter, this idea that, oh, I could survive. In the next sentence, we have a touch of alliteration with sore must be the storm. And even that in must lends a small flavor of it. Sore must be the storm, right? What does that mean? That means sore being something that your muscles are sore, right? It means very bad. The storm has to be really, really bad. That, meaning the storm that, could abash the little bird. And so at this point, Emily is telling us that the little bird is the hope, right? She's laying out her metaphor. She's explaining what it is. We don't have to look for it anymore. We can find it. Abash is a strikingly interesting word. So abash means kind of embarrass. But notice that word bash inside of it might mean like a blow or a strike, such as would happen in lightning, right? So the kind of storm that could bash and knock out hope needs to be really, really serious, or that could even just embarrass it and cause it to not sing anymore. And that little bird, that's the little bird that kept so many warm. And those people that keep warm are the people that have hope. And then in the last stanza, we have, I've heard it in the chillest land. So what is it? It, again, is the tune. It's the hope that was singing. And the chillest land, notice all of these superlative adjectives. So we had sweetest, now we have chillest, Next, we get the strangest. Right? This is a poem of extremes. It's a poem of extremes using the superlative adjective. Yet, never in extremity, meaning at the very edge, kind of the place where superlatives exist, never in these places did it ask a crumb of me. So a question is, why is crumb a perfect piece of diction? Why is crumb a perfect piece of diction? Because birds eat crumbs. But this bird doesn't ask for anything. It's not reciprocal. Hope doesn't exist where it's like, hey, Hope, I'll give you this if you give me yourself. That's not the relationship with hope. Hope is just the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. So we'll be looking at some more of Emily Dickinson's poems, her thanatopic poems, for next time. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy your first flavors of Emily Dickinson.